Welcome, Michelle. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm really good. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a joy to be here.
Could you share a bit about what it is that you do and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So, I guess now for the better part of the last 15 years, I was actually a trial attorney in Miami. So I had a law practice there and, the big downtown office and the whole team and all the things. As you can imagine, someone who grew up very much like overachieving, loving structure, loving give me all the lists and all the tasks and all the order and all the kind of rigidity and I will thrive in that. Love being in my head, the logic and the analyzing and all these different things. And then I had my daughters, what felt like back to back. They're 16 months apart, 8 years ago, and realized very early on in postpartum that I was actually in quite a deep pit of burnout. I think I had probably been ignoring a lot of the mental and emotional signs for quite a while. And it wasn't until after having my second that my body just like kind of was like, you're not going to pay attention. We're just going to shut you down. You need to just rethink a lot of these things and the ways in which you're going about your life. And it was really, really hard. It was really tough. I was just miserable at a time when, we had walked through seasons of infertility and then to have two babies back to back and then to be miserable after that, right? It was like it just messed with me in so many ways. And I knew I needed help. And so I ended up, therapy and hiring my own coach and working with a functional medicine practitioner and really just discovering that a lot of the things that I had held as true for so long needed to be reevaluated. What I thought was strong or weak or good or bad, or like just these big labels that we kind of place on things. And as I started to ultimately slow down and learn what it looks like to live in a way that builds and supports a resilient nervous system, I started to heal, right? And the anxiety started to fade and the symptoms of burnout I was experiencing and the sense of overwhelm and my joy started to come back. And I was like, man, I know I'm not the only one walking walking this out. And it really became something I was just so passionate about sharing. So over the last 5, 6 years, I guess. It's kind of been something I've been teaching on the side on my podcast and programs that I have now while practicing law. And then last summer, our family moved. And in that, I kind of took the leap and closed my law firm. And now this is what I'm doing full time. I'm helping women who are where I was 8 years ago, trying to do all the things and feeling this sense of just being unfulfilled and burned out and like a shell of themselves. Just start to rethink things and try things differently and see the difference that it ultimately makes in everything, our whole way of being.
Yeah, very cool. I was wondering when you were talking there, you said you ignored the signs, the sort of mental and
Yeah.
physical signs that you were kind of burning out. What were those signs looking back that you were able to recognize were actually signs of sort of burnout?
Yeah. So I think these are the ones that come to mind, I guess. I was always overwhelmed, right? Even like little things that like logically I'm like, you should like you have pretty high capacity. Like you should be able to handle picking up a gift for, friend's birthday over the weekend. But like little things like that. What are we going to have for dinner, right? What school are my kids going to go? Like they felt so insurmountable. They felt so overwhelming. And every day I just kind of woke up feeling like I was already behind. So there was kind of a sense of urgency in everything I was doing. I was just always like, I couldn't catch up. I had struggled certainly with anxiety. And I think what was really frustrating for me about that is like my husband or my closest friends would be like, well, what's going on? Like, what are you so anxious about? Like, what are you worrying about? And it's like, I can't pinpoint anything. I'm just like anxious. I was exhausted. I was exhausted no matter how much sleep I was getting. I could take a nap and sleep 8 hours and I was still tired going through the day. I had gut issues that no one could really figure out since high school. And I think that was really tied to what I was experiencing. I was someone who was really uncomfortable not knowing all the details or having a plan. So I would find myself kind of getting into these patterns of researching or over planning. I had chronic back pain and neck pain and shoulder pain, and my muscles just felt kind of achy and tight. I had headaches. My skin changed. My hair started falling out, and I was just, I just felt this sense of like withdrawal. I think from others, from things that used to bring me joy, and then just even from myself. Like it was kind of like walking in this out of body experience.
Yeah, because I know one of the stats that you talk about, I think it's 89% of mums are experiencing burnout,
Yeah.
which is such a huge number, isn't it? And I've seen stats that for the workforce, I think this is for America, but I'm sure it's similar in the UK, 82% of the workforce is at risk of
It's wild.
burnout.
Yeah.
And it's so common, and yet maybe, I mean, I wonder if it's something that people don't really realize they're in it because it
Yeah.
becomes so normalized that you're just used to feeling overwhelmed and rushing everywhere. And then maybe it's only when your body forces you to stop, like you're suddenly exhausted and can't get out of bed, or you get sick, or
Yeah.
something like that, that forces you, that you actually realize. So I think it's so important to talk about these sort of signs that people might be experiencing.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we've, normalized something because of how common it is, without, really pausing to reflect on, well, wait, is this actually normal? And I think you're right. So many of the things that lead us to burnout are things, not only that we've normalized, but that the people around us and our workplaces and, society at large, I think really applauds. So that's kind of
Right.
tough. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. The kind of the work ethic and the succeeding and getting those gold stars for putting in 150%. I think it is really, like in our culture or at work, really celebrated.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, like, why do women, because is it women that struggle more with burnout, would you say, generally? And why is that? Why do we
Yeah.
exhaust ourselves like this?
I think it's true. And I think it's probably for a lot of different reasons. I think some of the reasons that I see most frequently, I mean, we just kind of talked about it, but I think it's this idea that there's kind of been this cultural shift to the woman who can do it all or is expected to do it all, right? It's like, I'm going to be the boss mom and I'm going to be the one who like makes all the meals at home and keeps up the house too. And then I'm going to really take care of my kids in a way that feels really conscious and present and intentional. And then I'm going to be the superstar wife and I'm going to do it all without having to ask for help, right? Or, and that again is really applauded. And it's like, we think we see other people doing that without knowing the full story. But so often, I have a group of women and I'll ask them like, how many of you are, and we go through that whole list of things, right? Running, teams or businesses or whatever. And you love this idea of being in that kind of hustle culture and the leadership and like doing the big things. And yeah, everyone raises their hand and kind of going through these things. And then all of a sudden kind of flipping it and be like, and who in the room is just so tired? Right? And every hand goes up. And who in the room just wishes that they could just be like held for a moment and have things kind of run and not having to be juggling all the balls just themselves and having support and all the hands go up, right? And it's this exploration of like, well, is it possible to experience both of those? Because I think for so long, we're running in one lane and we're so scared of the other without really taking a look at, hey, like, why is it so hard for me to ask for help? Why is it so hard for me to slow down? Why is it so hard for me to admit that I can't do all of the things? And we do what we do best and have known and have been applauded for and appreciated for, and we keep pushing, right? And we keep adding on. And, I just need to get through this week. This week's crazy. But when I get to next week, I'll be able to rest and slow down. Or,
Heard that
and
many,
it's
many
this,
times.
yeah, the mountain with no
Yeah.
peak. And so eventually, our body can't sustain that load and we reach a level of burnout. And then I think, another part of it is like our coping mechanisms for the stress that we experience every day are also things that we've kind of taken on as badges of honor. And, we've like, that's just how I am, right? Well, I'm just the one who like gets everything done, or I'm just like the responsible one who plans everything, or and we don't realize that like, yes, we've taken that on for a reason, and it has probably served us very well in a lot of ways. And if we're not intentional, right, around setting parameters and boundaries around that and being intentional in how we show up in some of those giftings, they can just kind of run wild and really have consequences that are, that can be devastating and send us to burnout.
Yeah. What were the things that helped you the most? Was there a certain realization or idea that really helped, or was it little things that you changed? What was it? What was it for you?
Yeah, I think it was both. I think, well, here are two that were surprising to me, I think, that I wouldn't have expected. Like, I thought recovering from burnout was just like slowing down, or like, getting more sleep or being more organized so I didn't feel frazzled all the time. But the two things that made the biggest difference for me, one, I had always thought of myself as someone who was very, like, I never yelled, I never screamed, I was like super chill. Like, I was good under pressure. I could handle a lot of stress. I was always kind of like even keel. And I was like, I'm not even the woman who like cries at movies, right? Like, I thought that was like something about myself that meant that I had, I don't know, self-control, or I wasn't one of those like dramatic women, or whatever the story was I was telling myself. And what I came to realize is I was just really, really good at repressing and suppressing my emotions, right? They were there. I was harboring a ton of anger that I just didn't even know what to do with, right? And I think that's true also for a lot of women. What I find with the women I work with is we tend to be on one of two extremes, right? Either you can relate to my story and you're like, I'm angry sometimes, but like, I'm never actually angry. Like, I never throw a fit or scream or yell or stomp my feet or express that in any way. Or we're on the other side and we feel anger, and, it just takes one little thing to kind of set us off. And all of a sudden, we're screaming and throwing and snapping at the kids and what have you. And there's a huge gap between those two extremes where we can learn to have a healthy relationship with our emotions, right? And accept them and greet them with compassion instead of judging them or criticizing ourselves for having them. And then truly learning how to experience and allow them to release in a healthy way. And when I started to do that, it just felt almost like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders, right? And I felt myself, one, able to experience these things that I think I was scared of, I guess: anger, grief, sadness, frustration, disappointment. And in doing that, it also opened up space for me to experience more joy, right? And pleasure and delight and wonder and all of these things that I wanted to experience more of. So that was huge for me. And then I think the other big thing that really helped me heal was learning how to get out of my head. I was so comfortable in my head. Like, if I was feeling anxious about something, I just wanted to sit down and work it out on paper and solve all the problems and like all of these things. And that was, that's helpful to a certain extent. And learning how to really get into my body and start to notice my somatic cues and have body-based tools to help cue safety to my body, instead of just trying to convince myself that I was okay. That was the biggest game changer for me in healing.
That's so powerful. The thing about kind of keeping your emotions inside, and I can really have this sense of so many of us women who will just be so busy that we think, oh, I'll just shove this down for now and I'll deal with this later, or we're not
Yes.
taught the tools on how to do that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of shame, I think, in terms of expressing anger for women, probably
Yep.
maybe more than men. And
Yes.
so being able to just process those emotions, I think, is so important. I really wanted to ask you about the nervous system. I know a lot of your work is around the nervous system,
Yeah.
and you talk about your nervous system being dysregulated. What are the signs that your nervous system is dysregulated, and what does that actually mean? What's actually going on inside your body when it's dysregulated?
Yeah. Okay. So our nervous system, it's like our body's command center, right? It's just constantly gathering data and information and storing it away, ultimately to keep us safe, right? That's its number one job. So when we talk about having a regulated or a dysregulated nervous system, we're talking about the capacity of our nervous system to flexibly shift between states to respond to whatever it perceives is going on around us to keep us safe. So often we talk about feeling regulated or being regulated or wanting to regulate. And we associate that with feeling calm all the time, right? Like, oh, if I was just a regulated mom or a regulated wife or a regulated what have you, like I would just be calm all the time. That's not actually true, right? Being calm all the time is not a very flexible nervous system. There are times where we need a little bit of sympathetic energy to be able to respond to what's happening around us. But then we want that flexibility to be able to kind of come back down to baseline. Same thing, there are times where we'll need to kind of slow down, right? Maybe where freezing or shutting down is our best response in the moment to protect ourselves. And then without getting stuck there, can we come back up to baseline stress level and just kind of flow between those states depending on what life looks like? That's a regulated nervous system, can experience the ups and the downs, right? And then have the ability to come back to that baseline. When we get stuck in our sympathetic circuit of our nervous system, so when we're feeling activated a lot of the time, right? Really anxious or edgy or irritable or, what have you, and stuck there. We call that being dysregulated. We're kind of stuck in one of these states and our body doesn't feel safe enough to come back, to shift out of that, to complete that stress cycle and get back to a place where we have access to all the parts of our brain that allow us to show up in the best ways, see things clearly and respond instead of react. So it's this idea of like, hey, how can I grow an awareness of when I'm in a state where my body's saying, hey, something doesn't feel okay here, right? Something doesn't feel safe. We're perceiving some sort of threat, and noticing how that shows up in our body, and then having tools to help us complete that stress cycle, bring safety back to our body so we can kind of come back to that baseline where we want to be spending most of our time.
Like that's a little nervous system 101 you've just given
Yeah.
us there. That's really such a good way of describing it. Does that link to things like HRV and like your heart rate variability? Because some people who might have a fitness tracker or something, you can get a measure of your HRV, which I think it does. It tells you how good your nervous system is at adapting. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's a measure of the resilience, right, of your nervous system and how well it can adapt. Yeah, so when you're tracking your heart rate variability, and then establishing what the baseline for that looks like for you, it can be helpful to kind of track when you're seeing peaks or when you're seeing dips in your HRV, just to get curious about what might be taxing to your nervous system. So in my group coaching program, the Burnout Recovery Blueprint, we actually track our heart rate variability through an app through the length of that program. And the women can see, okay, this tends to be my baseline. If my heart rate variability seems like it's, higher, wow, what are the ways in which I'm really supporting myself that's helping my nervous system grow in resilience, right? Am I getting like foundational things? Am I getting good rest, right? Am I processing my emotions? Am I engaging in social play with people who feel really safe? Am I nourishing my body? Am I like all these different things? And then the opposite is also true. If my HRV is dipping and I'm seeing a decline in these numbers, wow, like in what ways am I not supporting myself and my body and my nervous system that can help cue me, right, to get kind of come back and get back on track, so I can see those not HRV numbers rise. So it's a good metric for kind of objectively seeing where we're at with the state of our nervous system.
And I suppose I'm thinking about people that I've spoken to who will say that they are in an anxious or a sort of activated state for much of the day, when they
Yeah.
feel as though they're in fight or flight, they're going through their day. And even when they want to switch off, they're still in that state. And I
Yeah.
suppose that will be a sign that nervous system dysregulated and something needs to be done there. I wanted to know about your take on self care and sort of traditional self care, because I know that your take on it is that self care isn't enough when it comes to this.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a question, I guess, of what is self care, right? I think that the way it's been, I don't know, commercialized or sold to us, or how we tend to hear about it, are things that we might schedule into our calendar for ourselves. And, it's the spa day, or going to get a mani pedi or a massage or what have you. And I love those things, and I think they're great. And I think how we care for ourselves is just so much bigger than that, right? Like, I think, having healthy boundaries is one of the most powerful forms of self care that we can have, right? Trusting ourselves, allowing ourselves to surrender to things beyond our control, huge forms of self care, right? Building margin in our schedules, and not just like rushing throughout our day to get to the next thing, and having meetings back to back all day. And, that is self care. Staying in our own business is self-care. A lot of times we find ourselves, meddling or gossiping or worrying about, what everyone else around us is doing. That can be really activating to our nervous system. Not moving our body, right? Moving our body is such a beautiful form, powerful form of self-care. So I think really expanding what it looks like to care for ourselves beyond those like one-offs, right? That we can go spend a couple hours and just feel ourselves like, how can we build that into our day? And I think it's more of a lifestyle, I think, right? How we go about our days, rather than like, hey, I need to pencil this in to care for myself.
I was thinking there as you were speaking, I went to some acupuncture a while ago, and the drive to get to the acupuncture was a horrible drive. There's like a really awkward roundabout with like 5 lanes of traffic, and several times I've got into the wrong lane, had to go all the way around, and I was going to be late for this session. I was like, oh, am I more stressed trying to get to this appointment than if I'd just done something simpler or something? And I wonder if sometimes we could be like that, like got to do this sort of intense yoga class, or I don't know, like, yeah, ticking off these things on our self-care list, but actually maybe we just need, yeah, we need to say no to things more, or we need to go to bed earlier or something. It's not the kind of traditional things that you might think of.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think with a lot of the things too, like kind of to your point about getting in this type of workout, or like, being really rigid in like, well, this is what I do for self-care. And then when that doesn't happen according to plan, because life, right? Sick kids or what have you, then like kind of that starts a whole new spiral of stress. And yeah, I think it's just being mindful of like, stress is stress, right? Our body doesn't do a good job of differentiating between, I don't know, something that's actually life-threatening, being chased by a large animal, and, being in a roundabout and not being able to get out and running late for an appointment. It does the same thing to our body. It releases the same physiological response, right? So just like being mindful that, a really hard workout can feel cathartic. But a lot of times, ultimately, that's also stress on our system. So if we're operating at the edges of our capacity to handle stress without being sent into a stress response, right? Fight, freeze, or fawn. What we think is actually helpful can actually be a stressor. So just noticing, right? It feels really good when I go on a really long run. But how does it feel a few hours later, right? Am I then even more depleted, or do I find I'm feeling more anxious later in the day? Which is interesting. I don't think we think about that.
Definitely. Are there any habits or practices that people can do to regulate their nervous system?
Yeah. I think there's like overall big picture foundational things that we can do daily that really help to support a resilient nervous system. And then there's so many kind of in the moment things that might help you to feel better and kind of feel more grounded when you need them. So big picture, there's 3 things that I teach that I think in also with like things we've talked about, like healthy boundaries and just the daily habits of like nourishing our body and taking care of ourselves and getting enough rest. But the big 3 foundational things that I think really help are, first, we've got to move our body, right? There's like no way around it. Moving our body is the most efficient way to close that stress cycle and bring safety back to our body, right? If you think about it, even just being in fight or flight, like the words fight or flight, when we're in that state, like every cell in our body is primed for movement. We're going to run or we're going to fight. So often we'll feel that, right? We're in fight or flight. I feel really anxious or worried or what have you. And we'll try to just kind of like stay still, right? I'm going to sit here and I'm going to like, breathe for a minute, or I'm just going to sit here and, and I think that's great after we've moved because our body is telling us to move. So like listen to your body, move your body. And then if you can incorporate some of those practices that feel really calming and safe, that's a beautiful practice. But yeah, moving your body every day. The second is I think we have to incorporate some sort of stillness practices every day. There's just so much that happens, particularly in our brain, when we are not being stimulated or taking in new information or trying to process or plan or what have you. And in my experience, especially with the women I work with, they really struggle with this. And I really struggled with this too, right? If you've been in patterns, decades probably of like, go, 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 busy equals productive equals worthy, like whatever stories are tied up in all of that. It's just so uncomfortable and can feel really unsafe to feel like we're not doing anything, right? And then where's my mind going to go then? And I think just starting really small and being aware of like, hey, have I had any time today where like the TV's been off and I wasn't listening to a podcast? Maybe when you go for your walk, leaving your phone at home, or while you're folding your laundry, like not having any noise going around you, or having a meditation practice or something like that is so powerful for teaching your body, one, that it's okay, right, for us to rest and stand down, and it's safe to do that. And then second, for all the things that your brain needs to do in those moments, right, to store away memories and increase creativity and heal and clean itself and all these things. And then the third one is play. And that is one that I think, especially as women who might be raising kids, we've become so disconnected, I think, as a people from the things that just bring us joy, the things that we do not for any particular end, but just because they're fun, right? And like they bring us pleasure. So just really going back to the things, even if you think back when you were a kid, like, man, what did I love to do, right? Was it an instrument or paint or cook or just be by the beach or in the mountains or be outside or what have you, and just without overthinking it and having to plan and it being this big thing, like how can I just incorporate more through the day that feels like play, because it's not superfluous. It's not just for our kids, right? Play is one of the best ways we signal to our nervous system that we're safe. So just exploring that, I think, in a new way can be really healing for our nervous system. So big picture, I think movement, stillness, and play.
Thank you for that reminder about play. I think maybe when you've got kids, the focus is on your kids having fun a lot of the time and kind of like trying to facilitate that. And actually that reminder and that permission that we get to do that as well. And yeah, I love that idea of just thinking about, what did you love to do when you were younger or as a child even? Like the things that you were interested in, and trying to spark some more of that kind of inspiration into that area again. It's really powerful, I think.
Yeah, it's fun. And I think it allows us, even just in that, to explore and open up parts of ourselves that we do kind of tend to disconnect from, I think, in motherhood, right? Well, I don't have time for that. Or I'm so busy taking care of everyone else around me. When am I going to it feels like just kind of this aside. So kind of a reprioritization of ourselves, I think is beautiful. And it's so healing.
I really wanted to ask you about imposter syndrome, because when I think about what drains our energy
Yeah.
a lot, I think a big culprit is a sense that we're not good enough, that we have to wear a mask somehow, that if we show our true selves, we're going to be found out, we're going to be found wanting. And I think that uses up a lot of energy. And I wondered what advice or insights you had, or what's your take on imposter syndrome and what advice you give to your clients?
Yeah, I think so I grew up in northern Maine here in the States, which was like very rural, from a working class family. There were no professionals in my family or people that I even knew, right? There was no lawyers or doctors or accountants or engineers or anything. And I went to college, and then I graduated from college in 2008, which here in the States, that was a recession. No one was really hiring. And I was like, well, I'll just go to law school, right? I got good grades, and like that seems like a good next step, and I'm not really sure what else I want to do. And I didn't even realize that there were like entrance exams and things, like people had paid tutors and been studying for like months or maybe a year to like pass this exam to get into law school. I had no idea. And this was really before like, I don't know, just the internet, like just the availability of information. I was so naive. And I walked into that test, and I took it, and I like barely passed whatever would be like an average score. And lo and behold, I did end up going to law school. But I remember that first time that I went into a courtroom and walking in, and I was probably 24, maybe, blonde in a suit, and just seeing a whole sea of like bald, 60, 70-year-old men standing in front of me. And that sense of imposter syndrome like hit me like I had never experienced it really before. And it's so curious when we think about it, because I think when that comes up, whether it shows up as like kind of a critical voice or a voice that, tries to convince us that we're not equipped, or we're less than, or we don't belong, or we don't have the skills, or we're not smart enough, or, we're faking it and everyone's going to find out, and we're going to be, like that whole feeling coming up. Our first instinct, one, is that's really uncomfortable. So I think our first instinct is to kind of try to quiet that voice. And I think that's what I did for so long. I was like, that's a lie. Like, just quiet. I'm going to put you in the back seat, right? Like, you're not going to take over now. And I'm just going to learn how to like really suppress and ignore this voice that's coming up and telling me that I'm an imposter. And what I found is that's not particularly effective because there's a reason, right, why that's coming up. And there's a message and a purpose. And I think ultimately there's a highest intention to that voice that comes up. And as I continued, at least back then, to try to just quiet it and ignore it and shut it down, I found that it actually intensified and just grew louder. And then it was showing up like in motherhood, and then it was showing up, in my marriage or what have you. And I thought I might try a different approach. And I think the root of the new way of approaching it is really from a place of curiosity, right? If I could trust that this imposter syndrome voice coming up was really trying to do something helpful or productive, or that there was something going on there, what might that be, right? And ultimately, again, back to safety when we were talking about the nervous system, that little voice was chiming in when I felt like I was in over my head in order to protect me, right? If I can just keep her playing small, if I can just like keep her doing the things that she's really comfortable doing, if I can just keep her in this little box and we don't do anything new and we're not vulnerable and we might not be embarrassed or rejected or what have you, that part was just trying to protect me. So instead of hearing that critic come up or that imposter voice come up and trying to shut it down, I just started to internally have this little dialogue of like, hey, I hear you. Hey, you got to understand, right, that I'm actually quite equipped and I have a lot of more resources and maturity and all these things than I had back when you probably came online trying to help me out. And I've got this. So can you just trust, right? Can you just like inner critic, imposter syndrome voice? Can you just like step back for the next 20 minutes and trust that I can handle this hearing or this public speaking event or, whatever it is where that tends to come up. And then we can kind of do like a little debrief in the car or what have you. But over time, right, through repetition and consistency, those parts of us will come to trust, wow, okay, we did it. And it was really uncomfortable and scary. And guess what? Like, we didn't die. Here we are. And it's another day. And then I think for me, that's the way in which I've seen that inner critic or the imposter, what have you, kind of just take a little bit of a back seat and not be so vocal in those moments. But it kind of feels counterintuitive, to allow that part to kind of have its voice and speak. And that's the way in which we can develop a relationship with it, where it will kind of just quiet on its own and not have to be so loud.
Love that. Yeah. And thanks for sharing your experience. I think it's almost like a universal thing when you speak to
Yeah.
people about imposter syndrome. Like any successful woman will say at some point. Even Michelle Obama has said she experiences imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
and yeah, I love that idea of acknowledging it and listening to it and recognizing that it has a positive intention because it wants you to do well,
Yeah.
but not letting it control you, not letting it take
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
And if we acknowledge it, then maybe it will just quieten down a bit rather than sort of suppressing it and ignoring it. And then it's like bubbling away under the surface, getting more and more intense.
I think that's
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. What one question I often ask my guests is there anything that you are struggling with at the moment? And how are you moving through it or handling it?
Yeah, I think so. I mentioned our family just moved halfway across the country, and in doing that, the way that the timing kind of worked with selling our home and then moving to a new state, when we moved here to Texas, the school year had already started. And there was like already a lot of change and things happening. So my husband and I decided that we were going to try homeschooling for a year and see how that went. My girls are now 6 and 8. And let me tell you, like, I've done a lot of challenging things. Homeschooling and being with my daughters pretty much 24/7 has brought this new level of like everything that I thought I had like worked through or healed or whatever. It's like it intensified so many of the areas that I still need to work through. And it's been so challenging. And I had this moment last week actually where, I say for no reason, but I was just sad. And all day long, I was just like fighting back tears. And maybe it is imposter syndrome, but this idea was coming up of like, man, I'm trying to do this thing that I think was the best choice for our family right now this year in this season. And because of it, I feel like I'm failing at everything. Like I'm not able to work because I'm trying to homeschool. I'm really struggling homeschooling because I'm half in work and I'm half here. And it feels like everything is just like a struggle and a fight and just not going easily. And, all of this coming up in the moment. And I just couldn't stop crying, and my kids are there. And I think it just kind of brought a lot of this full circle for me about, being so passionate about teaching emotions and healthy emotional expression and emotional regulation and emotional intelligence. And then having my children witness me being very emotional, and like everything in me wanted to just like wipe my tears or go to the bathroom and kind of like push it back down and then come out and tell them everything was okay. And it was so hard to kind of feel how I was feeling and also allow them to witness that and make sure that they understood that it was still safe, right? For mom to be like crying and having a really hard day, and that could still be really safe. To allow them to witness that and then explain to them that they don't have to make me feel better and they don't have to do anything to make me happy, but allow them to just experience empathy and compassion and just being with me while I was sad. And we got through the day, and then we kind of talked about it a little bit the next day, and they had these questions that they brought up. But I'm like, man, what a thing to just be like cracked open one day and then to be like, all right, here's an opportunity to like parent and teach and coach like through it. Right. And I think that's just such a slice of life through all the things we experience, our own struggles and our pain and our suffering. And it's like in the moment, it might not feel like it, but there truly is so much purpose in it. And in that tiny little moment of just letting them witness that, knowing that they're safe in it and knowing that they don't have to make me feel better, I was like, wow, this was actually like there's not a lot of other ways to teach that. I'm like, this was really, actually really beautiful, but it was so hard.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And I need to remember that the thing of it's not, yeah, letting them know it's not their job to make you feel better
Yeah.
or to try and fix you or to be really, really good so that
Yeah.
you're going to be happy. I think so many of us growing up sort of received that message the opposite
Yes.
way, that we kind of have to be a certain way to make our parents happy or make sure they're okay or get love or something. So that's such
Yeah.
a important reminder. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for everything you shared. I've absolutely loved speaking to you. Where can people find out more about you and what you're up to?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the host of the Calm Mom podcast, so you can listen to that wherever you listen to shows. But we do some parenting, but really it's helping you, the mom, through anxiety, overwhelm, and burnout through a lot of nervous system based solutions. And then you can find me on my website. It's just my name, michellegrosser.com, and also on Instagram at it's Michelle Grosser.
I'll put all those links in the show notes for everyone as well. Oh, thanks so much for speaking to me. That was brilliant.
Thank you so much for having me.